Go grab some dryer lint and raid your recycling bin. We're talking with Cheryl Capezzuti today on Meet Our Mentors. Cheryl Capezzuti,
Hi.
welcome to Meet Our Mentors. How the heck are you, Cheryl?
Good. Thanks for inviting me. This is fun.
I'm so excited. I know we were just talking before the broadcast of how many times we've sort of crossed paths in various locations. We've been at nationals together, and we're like, have we ever met each other? I don't think we've ever. Maybe.
I don't think
And
so.
who knows? So it's great that we actually get a chance to have a conversation. Thank you,
Yeah, it's a
thank
lot
you.
of fun.
Yeah. Thanks for being here. I was at the last national festival in Maryland, and I remember just sort of taking a break, and it was still like not completely super hot and humid, but it was warm enough to be comfortable out in the shade. And I went out on that little glen, and I heard so much noise happening, so many drums pounding, and I saw these amazing parade puppets that people had been working on for many days in a row. And that was what you did at the National. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. It was super fun.
Can you tell me a little bit about that experience at the National, and then we'll back up and we'll
Of
we'll
course.
we'll
Yeah,
find
I
out more.
mean, it's a thrill to be invited to share your work with your peers. Like, it's one thing to, do your thing in the city where you live, where, I mean, I certainly feel embraced by my community, but to be invited to do a workshop and make my giant creations with people. I did a community workshop. So it wasn't all puppet makers. It was people from all walks of life participating. And then to, like to stage it and to have the bands show up and the music. And I felt like every parade, there's this sense of joyous experience and celebration that I hope my world or my work invites people into. And despite the heat and the sweatiness of the experience, I felt like, really good about the way that it also kind of played out.
Yeah, absolutely. And here's you can see the picture there. That's at is that at Pittsburgh Airport
That's at
or?
the Pittsburgh International Airport. I was artist in residence at the airport where I made giant puppets out of things people throw away at the airport. In fact, I have one right here. Here.
What that is, you could barely fit it in the screen. That's brilliant.
I
So
know.
what's the strangest thing that people have thrown away at the airport that you've incorporated into one of these giant
Well,
puppets?
the puppets had themes. So one puppet was made from snacks and wrappers and things like that. So people gave me like their bags and I wore gloves and like whatever, made that. One was made from the trade airports, is that they're like a whole city unto themselves. And so the one we're looking at in the picture was actually made from like safety paraphernalia that the people wear when they work in the airport.
Like
And
I could see
like,
the safety vest that they've got on. What's the
exactly.
green? What's the big green piece? Is that a
I
poncho
got
or?
donated parachutes for their costumes. So like the I the all the costumes were made from the an old parachute. Like one parachute made 5 costumes. They're big. And then each puppet had kind of like that theme. One was made from travel maps, like like you have like the directories and you have your like all these different kinds of
Like,
things.
here's
One
where you'll
was
find
made
this at the
from,
airport or
yeah,
that.
like things you do while you're waiting. And that performance ended with um a giant puppet dance experience in like the center core of the airport, dancing to music made from found sound at the airport. So like the sound of
Wow.
the conveyor belts and the emergency light, like all that kind of stuff. I worked
Did
with
you have a
a
composer that would take
Yeah,
all
yeah,
of these
yeah.
sounds? Oh, so
Yeah.
cool.
So I work with a sound designer here in Pittsburgh named Herman Pearl. He does all the music for the, like the performative work that I do, or at least a lot of it. I also have another composer that has worked on like if we're doing a musical or something. Herman does like the hip hop dance stuff, and my pal Doug Levine does like all like has written a lot of the music for us.
That's fantastic. That's great.
Yeah,
So
more fun than lots of things.
let me reel you all the way back. It's
Yeah.
from what I understand, you're a you came into puppetry as a sculptor. So
Yeah.
where did you discover puppetry, and like from a sculptor to a puppet builder? That makes absolute sense to me, but tell me about the path that led there.
Right, sure. I mean, so I was always a kid that needed to make things. I'm kind of a studio junkie. And ever since I was a little kid, I've been making art. And I know, like even in high school, I ran out of art classes to take in my high school because there were like two. And my art teacher said, like, how about this? You can have a studio in the closet. And she set up like the art supply closet for me. And she said, don't tell anybody. And so I like started my practice just doing crazy stuff in the art supply closet, thanks to Mrs. Stahora. And when I went to college, people were like, well, you're kind of smart and you can draw. You should be an architect. And went to architecture school. And about 3 years into it, I was like, oh man, I'm not interested in buildings at all. And left architecture and I got a degree in integrative arts. Like the day that I graduated, someone said to me, like, oh, it's kind of like you got a degree in nothing. Well,
Ouch.
I know. But I mean, in some ways, I really had no idea what I was going to do. You know what I mean? Like, I learned a lot about, like, I feel like in college, I learned a whole lot about the wackiness of the world and wanted to be part of that. And then when I got out of school and I was kind of like, okay, I'm a sculptor. I was at the time making like little tiny sculptures out of Dryerland and bigger sculptures out of discarded scrap wood. And I got this job at an art center on campus and I got lucky. Sarah Petey came to town. And I don't know if anybody knows Sarah Petey, but she is like the human that changed my life, really. Like I was her assistant for 1 week because of where I worked. And I made puppets with her and I made my first puppet in that workshop. And I was like, oh my God, like they're building things with cardboard, which architecture school makes you like, I can make anything out of cardboard thanks to architecture school. And I started making, there's Sarah right there. Yeah. So I learned how to make puppets. And I think I sent a picture of, there's a turquoise puppet with like a big round mouth that was like a kind of an iguana puppet that I made. It was my first puppet. And after Sarah left, and it was literally 1 week of my life, Sarah went back to Boston and the arts festival in town said, hey, like you seem like you're pretty good at this. Do you want to make some puppets for us? And so I made puppets for the Children and Youth Day event at the Central Pennsylvania Festival of the Arts. I was at Penn State at the time. And I made a dozen puppets. And when I moved back to Pittsburgh, I had like a photo book with like 10 puppets in it. And I took it everywhere I went and I told people I was a puppet maker and they believed me. Like just
Did you think you could like, oh, here's my path forward. I can make a
I've
living at this? Or was that,
never
I mean, like, or was it just like, this is the most interesting thing I've ever done and I want everyone to know? I mean, that's brilliant. I love
it was
that.
just like, you know, all I knew since I could pick up a pen or pencil, I knew that I needed to make art every day. I run out of goodness really quick if I'm not in my studio. And I knew that I'm prolific, like I like to make a lot of things. Like I like to make sets of things and giant collections of things. And puppetry, I like people were paying me money to make puppets. And I was like, maybe I could actually do this. And I started, like making more and more puppets. And when I got to Pittsburgh, I shopped my little book around. Like literally, I just took it to like art networking events and told people I was a puppet maker. And I got hired pretty quickly by First Night Pittsburgh. That was in like 1997, I think. I got the commission to make the parade. And the first parade that I made for them was like, a dozen puppets in a marching band. And we walked all over the city with like an audience of 7, like, but I've been doing like sort of pushed into that. And I've really, paid my studio bills by making giant puppets for parades.
Yeah.
And it's been good to me.
Nice. What here's a sampling of some of your, are these like Czech
These are tiny.
marionettes or?
They're little rod puppets, and
Uh-huh.
they are, so each one is made. I asked people to give me a little bag of trash, and each little puppet is made from like that one person's little bag of trash. So like the one in the middle with like the white hair is actually a tissue, and there's like a
That's
little
brilliant.
church program and so a deck of cards, and they are um really just puppets that I made. They never actually went into a show. They were just for, they were little experiments that I made. The one on the end with the wings was used for a music video by a local Pittsburgh performer. And again, it's like a rod puppet, and these are kind of shown without the rods in them, but they are, like adjustable, and you can move them pretty well.
And are they operated from the top then? Is that?
They're operated to like kind of tabletop
Okay,
style,
gotcha.
but for the music video, then you can actually see there's a little wire. That one, we ended up refabricating it so that it could be operated from the top. They're, I would say, more experiments, but also like in keeping with my ethos, which is to take the things our world discards and turn them into something that makes us reflect on who we are as human, good and bad.
Mm. It's also interesting to have like the restriction of you can only build with these materials that are in this little bag, and there is a challenge to that. There's a, I forget the name of the film. I think it's The Five Obstructions, where a
Yeah.
filmmaker is challenged to make a film that he made back in the
Yeah.
60s 5 different ways, and each time like the challenge is so absurd, like you have to shoot this in the worst place in the world, so he
Yeah.
chooses the red light district in Calcutta, and he shoots it, and he comes up with a brilliant piece of art because of all
Yeah.
of the restrictions. And this
Right.
seems similar. It's like, well, here's the
Yeah.
restriction, and that just spurs creativity, rather than if you have like an unlimited budget and all the materials in the world to pull from, then it's like, well, what, I can't create. I need to, like, oh, I only have
Right.
2 hands for this show. How do I
Yeah.
do the 3 little pigs?
Right.
Or yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So do you
I
find
love
that
that.
challenging as well?
I find it's like my joy, right? In like taking the stuff that we have and making something from what we have at hand. And I like to do that with, I work with a writer director. Her name's Kelly Van Aken on all of my performative work. And I also give her similar things. So I'm like, I don't know what the story is, but it ends with a giant tap dancing puppet made out of dryer lint. And
as most stories do. I mean, come on.
as most stories do. And the beauty of Kelly Van Aken is she takes my, like that like little tidbit, like we have coffee and I say, I think this is the tidbit or whatever. And she, like builds work that's actually really meaningful around the tidbit, and I mean, how do you come up with ideas? Like ideas for me come from, like the world, like you can reflect on our world, and there's a lot of things about our world that are kind of disgusting, right? Like we have so much trash and so much like raw material that gets discarded. It's kind of fun to, and also like feels at least mildly purposeful to make work with that. There's Kelly right there. And she's the person that I moved to Pittsburgh in the mid 90s, and Pittsburgh was a playground for artists in mid 90s. I did like so many things that were hard to believe that we did, So there was like abandoned buildings everywhere, and artists could do like almost anything they wanted. And I just said, I will say yes to everything.
Is that why you went to Pittsburgh? I mean, was there a draw for artists at that time? Because
I grew up in Pittsburgh, and
okay.
I didn't have a better option, and I was in love. I married the guy I moved to Pittsburgh for, and he's still around. But my
Pretty
family's
decent move
here.
then. Yeah.
It worked out. And Pittsburgh is so affordable, or at least at that time, like young artists, young poor people could go and buy a house and have a studio. And the most important thing to me, and probably my whole life, has been making sure that I have studio space to make. And these days I have lots of studio space that I use for lots of different things. But with regard to like my sort of like introduction to theater, because like obviously I came through this as a visual artist and architect, sculpture, And when I moved to Pittsburgh, I was making these parade puppets. I had never done any work in theater at all. And I met Kelly Van Aken, and she said, well, at the time I was making this is like one of my little lint guys. This is like a little tiny guy made out of dryer lint.
And then is it covered with like, what is it covered with? Or is
It's
it
just lint.
just lint?
It's just lint. Yeah.
And how do you get it to hold together? I mean, what's the,
like, I mean, you can mix anything with paste and turn it into clay.
okay. All right.
Yeah. And so like I kind of turn it into a clay, mix it with paste. I've mixed it with all different kinds of paste. I have a sort of a process that I use now, but so I was making these little sculptures and I was making these giant puppets, and Kelly said to me, why don't you make puppets out of dryer lint? And I was like, oh, I don't know, why not? Right. And we did our first show together. I actually have my first puppet that I made out of dryer lint here.
Look at that.
This is my first hand puppet I ever made. And this is Febreze. He's the little guy in the show that ends with a big guy. So in the show that Kelly wrote, I said it has to end with a tap dancing dryer lint guy. We performed it at the Black Sheep Puppet Festival. There he is. That's
the big guy. Is that?
Yeah.
All right.
We performed it at the Black Sheep Puppet Festival. It was my first puppet show. And the story was basically like a lovelorn laundress who every time she threw her lint into the trash, the dryer lint guy got bigger, and he was in love with her. And it was a love story. Basically, she fell in love with a guy in the trash can. He's cute, right?
That's brilliant. I love that. I love that. It's so we talked a little bit about this, as we were getting ready for the interview, but like, it's so funny that we both ended up in puppetry, where I, like when I was a kid, I wasn't a builder, I wasn't a maker, but I was a performer all the time. I was like, like even when I wasn't in a show, I was performing, right? I was always performing. And I had no idea. And I love puppetry as well. I'd always animate my little stuffed animals and I do all of that. But it was the performance aspect. And then when I got into college and somebody said, oh, you'd be a great teacher. So I was like, all right, I don't know what the hell I'm going to do. So I'll be in, and it's where I found out the weirdness of the world, like you were describing. And I took a course in puppetry, and the rest is history. And it was, for me, puppets are just sort of a means to an end, where it's just like, I've got to have the puppets either built, or I've got to figure out how to make them myself so I can get to the good part for me, which is putting on. And yours is sort of the opposite. So you
the
build.
Good part is the making part.
You build to build. Whereas like I would rather prefer, like, if I had the choice, like if I never had to build another puppet again, man, I would never build another puppet again.
It's funny,
as long as I still get to perform all the time. Where it would be just the opposite with you. You'd give up performance in a second if you could just continue to build.
Right? Yeah. I mean, like Kelly, like I always say, Kelly makes me perform. Like she writes this show and I make the puppets, and I tell her what it's about, and we do it together, and then all of a sudden we have to rehearse it, and I'm like, oh, I hate this. I don't want to do it. And I always do it, and it's always fine. You know what I mean? I don't feel like super confident in my role as performer. Like I feel like often I feel like a little bit of edge or anxiety around performing that I never feel in the studio. Like in the studio, you have like your moment of doubt where you're like, oh, I don't know if this is going to work, but you always know you're going to get out of that. And on stage, I feel so vulnerable because I don't have the confidence to know that I'm always going to get out of my moment of doubt, I guess. But like,
I was just laughing. I was thinking, well, it's going to be over in 30 minutes, one way or the other. So it's like, unless it's not, and then you're up there forever, right?
Right. But these days, like I've been fortunate in my opportunities. Like the city of Pittsburgh has been commissioning a show that's my studio right there. That's my little backyard.
Is
studio
it the whole garage back there? Is that the
whole garage?
Nice. It would have to be with the size of some of the stuff. Building,
right? So downstairs is mostly storage for the big guys. And right now it's packed because I normally keep about 70% of my collection at the Braddock Library, and people can check them out with library cards and go use them for whatever they want. So that's
That's
one of my
cool.
big public art projects. But right now they're all home because that library is under construction. It's actually they argue that it may be the very first Carnegie Library built in the country. It's definitely one of the first. It's this big old building. But anyway, right now you can barely walk in there because it's just like a couple hundred giant puppets. But the like sort of like that process of making and inviting people to make with me, like these are my neighbors and friends, just showing up to make puppets.
Do you prefer to sort of like work with not work with, but like have others
Yeah.
creating around you while you're creating? And what's the attraction for that for you?
Well, I like coming up with a great big vision, imagining like what happens if we had, 3 dozen giant penguins dancing down the street, or what if we had like 40 this or that. And to make that all yourself is really hard, right? But to make that in community is really easy. And so the making, and then of course like you make them, and then I don't necessarily want to own every puppet that was made in those community workshops, which is why the library makes sense, because it's like it doesn't belong to me. It kind of belongs to the world. And I feel that way about a lot of the large scale work. Like I make it with people. We find joy in creation. We find joy in the performance of the work and producing the pageant or the parade or whatever it is. And then kind of like releasing it to the world is fun. Like I get texts from people saying like, "Oh, Cheryl, I saw you skateboarding in a giant puppet down Fifth Avenue." And I'm like, that wasn't me, right? I mean, I'm glad you think that was me.
Yeah. But that wasn't me. Yeah.
That wasn't me.
That was so when I was looking at the videos that you sent over, what I saw in the, and we'll take a look at this in a second. What I saw in the little shorts with the smaller puppets is that everything was aiming, or it seemed like a lot of things were aiming at a tableau where there would be like when the 2 puppets' hands came together to form the heart, it was like things were built to have a tableau and then move on. And it sounds like even like, what if you had 60 penguins dancing? That's also, it's not like a frozen tableau, but it is an image that it's like, yeah. And so is that sort of your theatrical approach then to it's like, I'm not necessarily so interested in telling a story as I am to getting to these tableaus, or I want to tell the story with these tableaus?
Through the tableaus. Yeah. That's a really interesting observation. And I haven't spend a lot of time reflecting on that, but it's definitely true in my small works. And I have made almost all my small works just for fun. Like we perform them around town for little things, but it's mostly just exclusively for fun. And I would say that all of them have a couple of things in common. Like that idea of the tableau, but also like almost all of them have like a built aspect to it where like the puppet becomes something else. Or the puppet starts as multiple objects and gets put together through the course of the show. And then, like their hands interlock. And then in that show, they actually, the big question of that show, and I guess I like to have a big question for each show. The big question for that show, it's called Irreplaceable Parts. And the big question is, how much of yourself can you lose and still be who you are? And so in that show, one of the puppets, like first their head is taken away, replaced with a different arm, and then the head is taken away and replaced with a different head, but their hands still match. And are you still the same person? And so in thinking about, I've done very few shows, very few of those smaller shows that are that have text or voice, like they're all set to music, and they are about like moment to moment. How do you tell this sort of story? Or maybe it's more like a painting where you don't have to, like different people could have different stories.
Let's take a look at some clips from your shorts.
Okay. So this puppet was actually constructed from 10 different pieces during the course of the show. And it's hard to tell. Like I do have a video of the whole show, but it starts out with you know, different pieces. This is another one. This is just like almost like a sculptural piece.
I mean, there's the tableau, right? There it
That's
is.
the
Like that's,
tableau.
if
Yeah.
I would imagine everything built up to that moment, which is
Yeah,
lovely,
it
right?
did.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, this piece is about the things you find in your attic, having a light, like the things that your grandmother left behind and how they, um, what they might become if they were part of the part of something else. But you're right, the tableau is an interesting way to think about it.
And this is the one where you're taking the
Yeah.
parts away from the
Yeah.
puppets. Is that, yeah? That's just lovely right there.
And this one, there's also like those umbrellas become lots of different things during the course of the show. This is sort of the end of it. I haven't looked at these in a while. So. But that also has a tableau, right?
Right.
Like the
Yeah,
rainbow.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
lovely. It's
Thank
really
you.
lovely. When I was like, when I was just looking at the pictures of your puppets, I was like, okay, yeah, I get what she's building, and I get what's behind it, but it's like what's behind the performance. And as soon as I saw some of the videos, and we'll take a look at the video of your fifth graders with those
Yeah.
wonderful parade puppets that they built. That I don't quite get, other than it's a total community thing, and it's a way to for them to show off. This is, here it is.
Yeah.
These are fifth graders, and the coordinator, to see like how many fifth graders do we have here? It's at least 30,
This is
right?
38 kids. Yeah.
And like all of the puppets are so original, and to see
Yeah.
them all moving in the same way, and you can't see their faces, but they're just enjoying the heck out
Oh my
of
God,
getting to
they're
be
enjoying the heck
bigger
out of
than
it.
they are in real life. And at that,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. How
Yeah.
often
There's a
do you do
magic in it.
these sort of things with the fifth graders?
Right. So I have a day job and I'm an art teacher, and I meet once a week with fifth graders we build them in art class or after school, different events. I've been fortunate to have a little bit of funding from the Jane Henson Foundation to support the work with kids. And so I work with them about once a week, but some of them just live in my classroom. You know what I mean? Like spend a lot
No,
of time with the kids.
absolutely. Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
that to me, like the whole like dancing and giant puppets is like there's nothing more fun than that, in my opinion. Like for me, that's not performance. That's like I could put on a giant puppet and dance all day and not feel any kind of performance anxiety. It's different whenever I'm doing those small shows. That's actually me, and they're smiling inside that one.
Although
This
I can see your smiley
You
face. I
see that?
love it. I
This
love
set
it.
of puppets, someone gave me one of those foam mattresses. They said, Cheryl, do you want a foam mattress? And I'm like,
Do
I
I ever?
totally do. And I turned it into a set of 10 like bouncy dancers. Like their hair is made out of plastic bag scraps and old tablecloths and things like that. And these are actually made from the backpacks made with the backpacks that I got the day I met Liz Joyce. We were talking about that earlier,
Oh,
how
yeah,
we
yeah,
met.
like the big
We
nice.
went
In
in
Minneapolis? Is that where?
Minneapolis,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
But the that the 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 fun of dancing in giant puppets and being able to build them light enough so that like a fifth grader can put it on for an hour and just go at it has been like one of like the funnest challenges of my professional life, to be able to make them light and fun and happy to wear. Because I think that you see a lot of giant puppets, they're bigger than what I make, but they're so heavy that they lumber instead of like, and I always want that I've like been like seeking lightness for a long time with that
yeah.
work.
All of the ones that I've seen of yours in person and on video have flow to them. They've got like loose fabric and everything,
Yeah.
to give it like extra side movement that you're not actually having to move every time. Monty
Right.
Puppet,
Yeah.
she's out in my area. She wants to know, do you have curriculum for these that you can share? Is that something that the
Yeah, I mean,
Henson
that's a
Foundation
great, yeah.
allows?
I
Or,
mean, I'm certainly happy to share. Like, I mean, I've done workshops like I did the workshop at the National Festival where I shared the practice and shared patterns and things like that. Lots of times the first place I send people when they're interested in building giant puppets is Sarah Petey and the Puppeteers Cooperative, 68 Great Ways to Build Really Big Puppets. Like that's sort of the handbook that I kind of started with. And then from there, like if I'm happy to, I don't have like a specific written curriculum, but I'm glad to share the work that I do and the patterns that I use. I know that Lily Pad Puppets up in Ithaca, New York has
Oh
been
yeah.
making giant puppets using my patterns after attending the workshop. And it's been fun to like kind of mentor her through that process. And I'd be happy to sort of, like work with anyone who is interested in that. I'd love for there to be giant puppet dance clubs around the world, right?
That would be really cool. Well,
Yeah.
speaking of mentorship, the name of our program is Meet Our Mentors.
Yeah.
And so we've talked about a few, like I'm sorry, what was the name of the woman that you had just for that week that sort of like
Oh,
changed
Sarah
everything?
Petey.
Yeah. So
Sarah
tell me about
Petey.
some of the other, her and some of the other
Yeah.
people that have
I mean,
inspired
Sarah
you.
Petey grew up at Bread and Puppet in Vermont. So she's that's like her ethos. And I learned from her. And then for years after that workshop, we would I don't know how it happened, but we went to Detroit every year and ran a parade. And I learned a lot about running parades by helping her at the Detroit Festival of the Arts. Um, and and then like in some ways I've worked in a vacuum, like in terms of puppet making. I've like I started with Sarah and her handbook, and then have just over time like wanted my puppets to do different things and have kind of figured out a lot on my own. And then I remember like going to my first national festival, and it wasn't that long ago, maybe, I don't know, it was in Connecticut. So I don't know how long ago that was, but I don't think I met anybody. I just kind of like hung back and watched, but I realized like, oh, here's where all the people are that these, here's my people, you know what I mean? Like, and like when I think about mentorship in puppetry, I'm not sure that I have as many mentors as I wish I had. Like I feel like I had to figure out a lot of things on my own, but there's always been people that pushed me or that like supported my creative habits or saw something in me that, like the art teacher that set up the studio
Yeah, the closet
in
studio.
the closet, like a little creepy, but it
Not
was
at
good for
all.
me.
I totally,
Yeah.
well, I mean, the fact that that made you feel so special,
Oh my
and like,
goodness.
and that she saw that that's who you were, and she created
Yeah.
a space for that was just yours. That's beautiful. I mean, that just
It's
is the most
amazing.
supportive thing you could ever have. That's
Right.
terrific.
And
Yeah.
I want to like, I guess, I mean, I've been teaching for a long time, and I think in some ways, like that experience that I had when I was really young made me like want to teach and share, and I'm not sure that I kind of went into teaching thinking like, oh, well, I'll give that a go. But then it ended up being like a calling, and I teach art, and I make mostly I teach puppetry. Like, oh, that's what we do in my art classes. We make puppets. And it's it's exciting to see, like, to be that space for other kids. And Giant Puppet Dance Club kind of attracts kids that maybe are interested in something a little different than like mainstream being, and it's a lot of fun. Trying to think about mentors. I mean, like the one mentor that I haven't really talked about on the program yet is Don Kunze, and he was my architecture professor, and we defected at the same time to integrative arts. And I mean, I think he still did some work in architecture, but what I loved about him and that experience there, the same thing. There he is. In integrative arts, they didn't necessarily have studio spaces for people, and he made sure that I had a studio space in like this really weird building where I could do the crazy things that I needed to do. And I think that like almost all the mentors that I've had over the years are people that could see in me like this need to make, and could funnel or channel that into something that felt productive as opposed to crazy.
How can you talk a little bit about like what it was about architecture and and doing that aspect that was just like, oh, this is so not for me. Like,
Yeah. So I loved architecture studio the first couple years because it is, you spend 20 hours a day working and getting crazy and making stuff. And the first 2 years were very much like inventive practice. Like you were thinking about buildings, but nothing was real, you know?
mm,
And by the third year, I, I could start to see that it was going to be about computers and that it
mm,
wasn't going to be about touching the stuff.
it's
And I
all
spent it in,
CAD and
yeah. And
yeah.
like the physical, like using my hands and the also like I had an internship where I drew restaurant bathrooms for a summer. And
Ugh.
I was like, oh God, I can't do this.
People have a hard time having their toilets look like big parade puppets.
Oh, so, it's just awful. And so when I left, the other thing about architecture school is it's very prescribed. Like you take these classes and then these classes and then these classes. And there's so many things I wanted to learn about that I didn't have time to learn about. And as soon as I left architecture, I was able to like take contemporary fiction classes and I was able to take sculpture studio. And Don Kunze was the person he had this seminar about monsters. And he introduced me to the Garden of the Monsters in Bomarzo, Italy. And if you see an image of that, it's like this big open mouth monster. And then you look at a lot of my younger work, and these big open mouth monsters are very, very similar. And I think just that idea that in the 1500s there was people carving crazy monsters out of stone in just north of Rome, and I love the idea that there we go, yeah. Love the idea that even during the Renaissance, when everyone was supposed to be doing this, some people were doing that. And I was always the person who wanted to go do that as opposed to follow the path that I was supposed to follow.
Yeah. 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 That makes a lot of sense how that would be. And were there a lot of artists in the architecture program? Or I mean, it was that because that just seems like a disconnect for me. I don't know anything about it though.
Yeah. I mean, it's super creative. Like if you go to architecture school is like boot camp for artists. Like if
Mm,
you go to architecture school, you learn a work ethic that you won't learn anywhere else. You learn how to draw anything in the world, and
wow.
you can make anything out of cardboard in 7 minutes. Like
Wow.
those
Wow.
are the skills that you learn in first year architecture studio. And and then it becomes more and more about buildings and less interesting. Um,
More
and
cardboard, please.
Right, exactly. Like, we built yeah, we just built so many different things, and it served me well. Like I don't regret for a second that I went to architecture school and learned structure. And I mean, with my work, I think about balance and structure like all day when you're building giant puppets, like that like the most important thing is the balance and the structure of the piece. But I just knew that, and everyone I know that was in architecture school with me spends their whole day on a computer. And I knew
Yeah,
that I couldn't spend my whole day on the computer.
absolutely. Absolutely. If you have any questions for Cheryl, please go ahead and type them in either the Facebook chat or the YouTube chat if you're on YouTube with us. Cheryl, what else? What are you currently working on and what are you excited about?
Yeah. So I got a couple things coming up. My fifth graders are performing at the Pittsburgh International Children's Festival. So we're in next Saturday. Or next Sunday, we're dancing downtown in downtown Pittsburgh. And we're super excited. We got like a half-hour show, half of it choreographed by kids, and it's just like so goofy and wonderful. And then there's my first night parade, which I think about all year, I suppose. And then I have the city of Pittsburgh has been commissioning a piece from Kelly and I every year for about the last 4 years. We missed a couple for COVID, but and that's we're in like the tidbit stage where I told Kelly like the tidbit for the show. And the tidbit for the show was, I think, like the land where we stand. Like, what's the story of the park? What's the story of the park before it was a park? What's the story of the land before it was the land? Like that kind of thing. And
It's such a great thing to do in miniatures because you can really,
exactly,
I mean, right? How
right.
fun, right?
Yeah. And then on March 21st, she's going to tell me the story. And then I have 2 weeks to build the puppets, and then we go into rehearsals. So
nice. And will you be performing as well, or?
I will not perform that show. Yeah, I will be. We've cast. Kelly works at a university in the area, so she casts like recent graduates, and because like for me in the summer, I want to be in the studio all day making stuff, and if you're performing, then like, yep. I know you would like to be in, you would like to be performing all day.
I would be searching Kelly out saying, please put me in your show. Get me out of the damn studio. I cannot take another minute in there. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's funny. And Kelly and I have a really good process together. Like we will rehearse in like a space adjacent to my studio. So like I'll come to rehearsal and watch a run, and then I go up to the studio and I make things, and then I bring them down, and then they run things, run things again. It's a very fun and organic working method. And I'm fortunate to have a collaborator that can like push into the process with me like that. And we've been doing it for a long time.
And she's super fortunate to have somebody that's willing to look at something and go, oh, I've got a great idea. Let me go and build it and bring it to you. And that that is, like for me as a director, that would be huge to be able to like have someone like that. So that is so incredibly valuable.
So, I'm so lucky. Yeah. She's like, we've been making art together since 1998, 90, something like that. And, like we really enjoy it. And we've made pageants together with giant puppets. We've made our tiny tabletop pieces. We've made shows that tour. And I'm just like really fortunate in my opportunities. And also, I get to make things. That's what I like to do.
Is the 68 Ways to Build Puppets, is that your book or?
No, that's Sarah Petey.
That's
that's definitely not mine. Yeah. But it's the handbook.
Have you thought about now that you have as much experience as you have building and taking things from that, have you ever thought about putting something together yourself, or is that just not very interesting to you because it's not building?
People ask me that all like if
do they? Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know that I'm a writer. I mean, I write curriculum for school. I don't know. Maybe I will someday, but right now, like I still feel like I'm learning. Yeah. And maybe when I'm done learning, I don't know. Maybe when I'm 80, and I'll do that.
There you go. I love it.
I'll set a goal.
Yeah, that's perfect.
Yeah.
Well, it's just been a real pleasure. These are your fifth graders?
Oh yeah, those are my kids. Yeah, lined up before we went in to perform.
Nice. So those are all their puppets sitting behind them. That's just terrific. That's great.
Yeah.
That's great. Do you go to different schools? Are they going all over the place, or is it?
No. We do about 3 shows a year. Yeah. And then we perform in our school for the little kids.
Nice.
Nice. This is a big one. This is a school we walk to. It's a nearby preschool for kids with all different kinds of abilities and disabilities. And we've been going there for the last, 4 or 5 years or maybe longer, and just go and perform for this audience that just like loves them, but it's not a regular touring group. Those kids do all of my parades. Like we do the Halloween parade here in Pittsburgh. They do New Year's Eve and a couple other like small parades during the year. Yeah.
I love it. Well, Cheryl, it's just been a pleasure talking with you. Thank you for spending some time with us. I really appreciate it. Everyone, we have Aretta coming up in September. We were supposed to have her a few months ago, but then life happens, and but she is rescheduled for September, and I believe it is it is October 10th is when we have Aretta So please join us for that. Cheryl, thank you again so much for joining us today.
Yeah.
It's been really nice to get to know you. I hope we actually get to meet each other at an
Now
upcoming
we have to
festival
make a
sometime.
goal,
We
right?
absolutely do. We absolutely have to. And thank you for the fine work that you brought to the festival last year. It was such a
Thank you.
nice breath of fresh air, literally and figuratively, at the festival. It was really nice to be outside and to see that much energy and love around puppetry. Is terrific.
Yeah. Well, thank
Yeah.
you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, you bet. All right. Thanks everyone for joining us. We will see you next time on Meet Our Mentors.